So benefits, let's start with the investors because we're in the investor world, right? First, indefinitely defer capital gain. So I would say indefinite and unlimited. So unlimited time, unlimited dollars. It's not like your primary residence that's limited to 250 or 500. This is unlimited. Make as much money as you want and can. All right. First benefit. Second, increased cash flow. Look at the monopoly analogy, right? I have a piece of land that I can't rent out. I switched that for a condo, a townhouse, a commercial property, something that produces income. Now I went from zero to increased cash flow. Or in the other monopoly analogy, 4 greenhouses produce one thing, the hotel produces more. Okay, very simple concept. Next, consolidation. What do you think I mean by that? How's that a benefit? What is consolidation? Think about it. What do you think? All right, so let me give you an idea. Let's say you have 4 houses, they're scattered all over a city or multiple cities. Kind of tough to manage that. Kind of gets old sometimes managing all over the place. Toilet goes down here, roof has a problem there, whatever, right? So the investor might say, you know what? Let me just consolidate. I'm going to sell off 4, whatever the number is, and pull that money to buy a bigger high density property. Strip mall, commercial, could be a hotel, whatever. Okay, that's consolidation. How about the opposite? Diversification. Which one's better? Mike, with 40 years experience, do you have a comment on that? Which one's better, consolidation or diversification, or does it matter? What do you think? You've seen it all probably, right? So that's why I picked on you. Sorry if you weren't ready. And if you don't have an answer, that's fine too.
I'm going to say diversification.
Okay. Why do you say that? Just curious.
So people's lives change. My experience, and it goes back since 1974, has been that we have markets that wax and wane. In 1982, the interest rates went to 8.5%.
Wow.
And I was in that market, by the way, with a title company, a building company, a development company, and a real estate company. And I was wondering what happened, who had that power to push the interest rates to 18.5%, and was that a little too much? So all I'm saying to you is that as an investor, my whole life, my whole business life, I don't like to let my money out too long before I realize that it's very possible that I can get a higher return. So there are some alternatives to that, and I always look for diversification.
Excellent. Great example. I appreciate that, Mike. Thank you. Let me give you both sides of it.
Okay.
And really the determination is whatever works for the client. Okay.
Sure.
So, and some of that is rational. Some is partially emotional. Sometimes just pure financial. It doesn't really matter. It's whatever works for them. So I had a client who relied solely on the income from the properties, was deathly afraid of having one property, because if something happened to that, it went dark, or they bailed on the lease or something, he would go to zero income. So there's no way in the world he was going to have just one property. He stayed diversified. That was his angle. Okay. And then have somebody else who gets sick of the managing of multiple properties all over the place. So they wanted to consolidate, right? So it really depends on their scenario. And sometimes I'll challenge a client a little bit based on what their goals are to help them, to help them think through what works. And that's really part of what our job is, isn't it? To kind of be that extra guide for somebody relative to our expertise, right? So either way, it really depends on the client. So Tiffany had a question again. So basically,
just real quick, real quick,
Mike.
you could talk to, maybe you could add a little thing about appetite and sophistication, right?
Right. Well, it's funny. We have some people who when I first started in this business almost 20 years ago, I thought I was the last person in the game. I thought everybody knew about 1031s. And I kept getting asked to do classes. That's why I love doing classes, right? Because people don't deal with it every day. I had a guy who over 100 properties. He was acquiring properties his whole life and never sold some. So how would he know? He said that I wouldn't have known. Luckily he had somebody on his team give him a heads up, and you hope for that. But that's why I say, don't react, be proactive. Mention this to your clients, mention this when you see an opportunity. So but thanks, Mike. And so back to Tiffany. So Tiffany says, let's say you buy a property that's less than what you sold. What happens to the difference? Very easy. You either pay tax on that difference or you put it towards another purchase. Very simple. And we'll talk about that when we get to the strategy piece a little later, but great question. It sits in the escrow account, but you have a time, do you have a time to use it? And we'll cover that, but yeah, it's either one or the other. So, and thanks for those questions as well. I really appreciate the questions. Everybody who hasn't asked questions, I encourage you, if you can, let me know you're out there too. All right, so relocation is another benefit, right? Can't take the properties with you. I like being near my properties. I moved from New York, that's still happening. I moved from Midwest, I moved from wherever, or I'm moving back up to the middle parts, for people move back to other areas out of Florida, right? I can't take my properties with me, so I'll sell them and buy back into where I'm at. It might be a break-even scenario. I might not make more money with it or not, or maybe I can, depending on the values and stuff, but I got to have them with me. So you protect the equity. 1031 protects that equity as you're moving those assets wherever you're moving them. Critical. About estate planning, I mentioned that before. I want to pass the properties to my heirs. I want to do it the most tax efficient way. This is a key part of that. Now, when you're continuing that equity and protecting it throughout your whole life, you protect it by moving it to the heirs, by having them enjoy what's called, I mentioned before, a stepped up basis. And basically what that is if you remember somebody, God forbid, passes away, they do an appraisal of the property to establish the current value. That current value is what comes in to them, to the heirs, as their cost now. That's their starting price. They don't inherit all the gains that their benefactor had, right? So that's called a stepped up basis. Now there's limits to that too. I think 11 million, but that covers most investors in the country. So keep that in mind, but it's part of that conversation with a good estate planner and a tax strategist, right? You're part of all that, whether you know tax or not, doesn't matter. It's part of that conversation, but it's definitely a key factor of estate planning. And the last one is maximizing leverage, right? A realtor brought this up to me over 10 years ago, actually, and said, what if I had a client that sold a $300,000 condo because between the condo fees and the restrictions of renting it out, it wound up being a break even, or it was losing money on a monthly basis. So I wanted to get out of that. So they sell for 300. Could they buy $1 million property, right? Cover with difference with a mortgage? Well, yeah, it's a 30% down scenario. Should be able to qualify for that, right? As long as the property can pay for the debt and still make money. Obviously, you got to run the numbers, but that's a fantastic way of positively using debt or leverage, right, to get to the next level. Doesn't mean you have to do that or not, but it's just out there, right? So any questions or comments about those? Those are your 7 key major benefits of the 1031 for investors. Anybody?
Just a quick question.
Yeah.
If you sell a property and you do owner financing,
Oh,
okay, so you have your gain, but
right.
you sold the property lending to the buyer. I heard there's an issue with that, with the 1031 exchange.
It's an issue if you can't solve it. Okay. So let me tell you how that works. Okay. Concept, let's go with $1 million because it's a nice round number, right? Let's say you sell a property and your net sale price, and you don't have a mortgage on it, is $1 million. Okay, that's again, contract less closing costs. We're always, in our world in 1031s, we're always in the net world. Net cost, net sale price, okay? Because that's what they figure the tax against, right? It's all net, not gross. So let's say you net $1 million in that scenario, right? In order to have 100% deferral of those taxes, the capital gains taxes and the depreciation taxes, you got to repurpose or respend or reinvest that $1 million, right? You have 180 days, we'll cover it later, but you have 180 days from close of sale to close on purchase, but you only have 45 days from close of sale to finish shopping. We'll get into that again later. However, if you give a seller financing, you don't have all that cash, do you? You're only collecting whatever you negotiate as their down payment.
Right.
Which is nothing wrong with doing that, right? That's a very effective way of making a transaction happen and getting more out of your purchase because you're going to get interest, right? So it's not a bad scenario. However, you have a shortage. So let's say you do 50-50. Let's say you take 500 from them and you give them 500 in a mortgage or a note back on the property. And let's say the payments are 12 payments a year for a couple of years, 5 years, 20, whatever it is. Well, if you have to get the exchange done in 180 and you only have 500 and the other 500 is not going to come back for well after the 180 is finished, where's that money coming from? Because if you don't spend it, it's taxable. And that means literally half of that transaction could be taxable. And quite frankly, that might be the entirety of the gain, which would kill the 1031 value. Think about that for a second.
So if I'm bringing 500 from home, it will be?
Excellent way of thinking about it. Exactly. You can buy your own note or sell the note. It's going to be tough to sell it typically, but you can buy your own note. You can always add funds to a 1031, always. In fact, you can add funds. Let's say you sell, let me finish this and we'll get to the next scenario. Let's say the same scenario is a $500,000 note and the buyer gives $500,000, the exchange finishes. And then before you to do the purchase of the million, you add $500,000 to the exchange account. You're basically buying your own note. You can absolutely do that. Now you're made whole. Exchange finishes at 100%, right? And then all these payments you receive afterwards, whatever the terms are, doesn't matter. It's whatever works for you, whatever you negotiate. You'll pay tax on the interest income because that was the given. That's income. That's not protected, right? But all those principal payments you receive, whether they're multiple payments a year or a lump sum down the road as a balloon, they're not taxable because you're paying yourself back, right? You bought the note, you put the money in. So it's a fantastic tool if you can cover it. Like I said before, if you can't, then it could kill the exchange, depending on how much money it is and all that. Mike, you're muted, buddy. I don't know if he's talking to us. You talking to us, Mike? Because you're muted. I'm going to assume he's talking to us for a second there. Mike, can't hear you, buddy. You're a good student. You stay muted. Thank you, sir.
So you took the down payment of 500,000 and paid 100 cents on a dollar for the note. Is that what you did?
Well, it's your own note. Yes.
No, I get it.
Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah.
So that stepped up the basis to the million. Is that kind of
No,
how you
it didn't
figured that?
step up the basis, just steps up the escrow account.
Okay.
We call it the exchange estate, which is the escrow for the 1031, right? You protected the whole entirety of the exchange now from taxation because you're fully funded. The exchange account is fully funded. So there it's ready to be funding and purchase to complete the exchange with the purchase.
Sure.
Kind of a creative way of doing it. But yeah, we still have people do that. Not everybody can do that or wants to do that or has the ability to do that, but it's an option. It's an option, right? But you got to, but see, these are the kind of conversations when I mentioned strategy. I hope you're starting to see this more and more throughout this whole process. Strategy and team are hypercritical to this. We need to cover these questions before closing, hopefully well before closing, because if they have to move things around, what if they took a loan against an asset, either stocks or took a loan against another property, right?
Yeah.
To get that cash too. They can do that. Go ahead. You were saying?
So the owner financing historically has also been sort of a slowdown of your payment of your taxes based on the income you receive from the note. And so you're paying your taxes, ordinary income, and maybe the gain over time, right? And since you've got interest, that sort of helps out. It eases the pain a little bit.
Yeah, you're given another income stream, basically, right? So
exactly.
I've had somebody split it in half and did half seller financing for 20 years. So literally that half was like an installment sale. They received the payments over 20 years. So the tax bills were stretched over 20 years. Remember, touch money, pay tax. You don't pay tax on money you didn't receive yet. So if you're stretching that out and you don't do the exchange because you can't make this happen, but you want to do the seller financing, you're literally, it's an installment sale, not to get too complex, but you're receiving payments over time. So you only pay tax the years that you receive the payments. So that's another strategy as well. So that's why we spend time talking through these scenarios if they come up relative to what the client's trying to do. Absolutely. You with me?
I'm with you. If you,
Awesome.
what if you had instead of an intermediary, you had a dealer that creates not a very low recourse note for the total sum?
So then, so would they be funding it within the exchange period, or would they be just doing an installment sale scenario?
You get loan proceeds at the closing instead of sale proceeds.
They could do that. I mean, the loan would be with the buyer's obligation, right? Not the seller, right? Unless the seller.
No, it's with the seller.
Well, then if it's with the seller, then it's 6 or half dozen in a way, because they're going to be fully funded. They finish the exchange, and then they're going to pay back that note with the funds from the buyer's payments, basically.
Well, the proceeds never came into the seller. It was loan proceeds, right?
Well, it depends, right? So, well, I want to table that for the next conversation because now
Fair
we're
enough.
detailed. No, but I like this kind of stuff. Everybody on the call, do you see how this happens? This is actually a positive and a good thing to happen with your clients. It's also, by the way, as we get to the benefits for realtors, because this is a realtor presentation, right? Realtor/brokers, a differentiator. If you can have these kinds of conversations with your team, right? This differentiates you from anybody else. That's one of the benefits. So thanks, Mike, for that as well. And we'll get to that later, Mike. I'll definitely finish that conversation.
Right.
Better public service. Again, you're bringing a resource that people don't know about, more resources for taxpayers. My number one referral that I give out are CPAs by far. People ask me, hey, do you have a CPA? Because when we start talking about this, it just brings up other things that they want to handle. It's really fantastic, these conversations, actually. All right. Market knowledge. As a broker, a realtor, your market knowledge is not only necessary, it's hypercritical for the success of an exchange, period. They need to know how they can access the days on market. I'll get into this later, but the days on market, the pricing, the availability, the returns, how they're going to turn things around faster. All of what you already do is enhanced and needed for this exchange process. It's a big differentiator for you as well, you know, and you'll see it as we get through this, how that really plays out. Stronger relationships. If you mention the 1031 and they saved 5 to 6 figure tax bill, I think that's strong. That relationship got stronger. I really do. I've seen it happen over the time I've done this. It's unbelievable, actually. Mention differentiation. Let me give you another version of differentiation. How many people on the call, whether you're realtors or not, even investors maybe, mention this to people you know? Market it. Throw it into your conversations. Put it in your marketing, flyers, wherever you're doing your business activities. How many people actively or proactively bring this up? Show of hands. If anybody does, raise your hand if you would, just to give us a heads up. And if you don't, that's okay. Klaus, excellent. Thank you. Curious on how you do that. You want to throw something by us in the chat or unmute yourself? Ideas that what you do. Video, so you do videos on the process. That's fantastic. We're going to send you also a link to all of our videos. We have about 50 videos, 1 minute each on 1031s. Definitely, if you want to use it with yours or add it to that, please let us know. Oh, that's great. That's great, Klaus. And maybe you can get ideas from everybody else on the call. These things we do are differentiators by far. How many other realtors do that? How many other competitors do that? Most do not. I've done over 30 of these classes or something like that since COVID started, and I've done probably hundreds since before that. I always bring this up, and I always encourage the realtors, starting today, not dropping everything else you're doing necessarily, but find a way to incorporate it. Be proactive with it, and you're going to be amazed. All of a sudden, nobody ever asked you about 1031s, and now you're getting asked. I mean, I can tell you if it's happened, and people come to me after the fact. Sometimes years later, hey, I attended your class a couple of years ago, and they go, yeah, it's starting to work. Never not do it, right? Don't think it has to happen overnight either. It's fine. All right. So Mike, thank you with the Zoom video. Excellent class. Thank you. Absolutely. So keeping going, I put additional transactions as the last benefit because that's the obvious benefit in my mind. Every 1031 involves 2 transactions, commissionable activities for realtors and everybody else that touches them. You're providing services for 2 transactions now to make the exchange happen. In some cases, there's 7, 10. I had a guy buy 50, 60 plus properties. He would buy condos like people buy groceries. That's just their business model. Okay. So understand that this thing happens in a way that everybody benefits. All right. Everybody benefits. And that's the best takeaway here. All right. And one other thing I'll throw by here again for realtors, should a realtor be an investor? Just a rhetorical question. I think so. You want to stay in the investor world, put the investor hat on, think like an investor when you're dealing with them. And that's what they're looking for. They're looking for good information and good resources like any other referral you would make. Okay, so that's my takeaway on there.